It's easier to grab again.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the 6th seminar series. Today, to check my calendar, is the 26th of April, 2023. And my name is Anita Dewi. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm a newbie, and I think I can still say I'm a newbie because I'm in the first 6 months at the School of Information and Communication Studies here at CSU. I'd like to start today's session with acknowledgement of country. So we would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal, Gandangara, and Biripi peoples of Australia, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which Charles III's campuses are located, and pay respect to their elders, both past and present. So I'll be your nice MC or moderator for today. So please be nice to me. In the next couple of minutes, we will be hearing from Jane, who will be sharing with us on her DECRA project, Library Services to People Experiencing Homelessness. As you can see on the screen there, she's already sharing her screen. But before we get on to that, so now Jane and I are working together in organizing seminar series throughout the year. We still have spots for August, September, October, and December. So please do get in contact with one of us if you'd like to present, please. Otherwise, we will start chasing after you. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Jane. And if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. Jane will be speaking for 30 minutes or so. And then after that, we will have discussion as well. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Anita. So yes, I'll be talking today about my research, my DECRA project, which I'm just about at the end of the first year of the 3 years. So these are really early findings, but I wanted to share with you what I've got so far. So first thing I want to do is also acknowledge the traditional owners and First Nations people of where I live, which is in Melbourne. So that's the Wurundjeri people. This photo is of our beautiful campus on Wurundjeri land in Wagga Wagga. So I also acknowledge their sovereignty of the land on which we work and live. So today I'm going to be looking at just a brief reminder of what my project is, and then looking at the first stage of the data gathering, which was a survey of Australian public library staff, and looking at the findings of that, some of which I was expecting and some of which I wasn't. So it's been a really interesting process. And then I'll do a little bit on what I've done so far for the rest of that first year and what my progress has been. So the first thing to look at is what my topic is, just as a quick reminder. So the overarching research question is, how can public policy best guide public libraries in their support of people experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness? So it's really looking at, it's acknowledging the fact that a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness or other forms of poverty and disadvantage are coming into our public libraries because they are, well, for all sorts of reasons. So we knew that, but what was happening was that often public library staff weren't well equipped to deal with the complexities of some of those people that are coming in, or some of the situations that might be arising because they're sharing our library spaces. And they recognise that these people are in our libraries, they want to work with them and support them, but they didn't always know how or what the best way to do that was. Pardon me. So that's the basis of my work, is that I'll be trying to work out how public libraries can best support that part of our community. So just as a quick reminder about what is homelessness, there's 3 types of homelessness. Primary homelessness, which is the one that is the most visible. So that's people sleeping rough. They're the ones that you see in the city, sleeping on the footpaths. They are also people who sleep in their cars or, under bridges or in quiet places where they're not going to be disturbed. Secondary homelessness is people who are living in temporary accommodation or boarding houses or crisis shelters. They might be couch surfing with friends or family, but they don't have a place of their own. And then there's tertiary homelessness, which is people like this lovely gentleman here who are living in caravans or boarding houses without leases and without any private facilities. So really insecure housing where the risk of homelessness is really high. The primary homelessness, which is sort of tends to be what we think of when we think of homeless people. And if you do like a Google image search for homelessness, you'll get pictures of people sleeping rough with shopping trolleys and all that sort of stuff. That's only 7% of homelessness. So 93% of homelessness is invisible. And that makes it really tricky when you're trying to work with that community because you can't always find them easily or know that they're there and right in front of you. So that's been one of the things that's been complex about the work I've been doing. So the actual data gathering that I'm doing for this whole project, so this is a 3-year project, works basically on 2 main stages. The first stage was a survey of Australian public library workers about their attitudes towards having homeless people in their libraries and their experiences that they've had working with that part of our community. And that's what I'll be talking about today. The second big chunk of data gathering is going to be based around 6 case studies, 2 urban, 2 regional and 2 remote. And for each of those case studies, I will be talking with the community themselves, so people who are experiencing homelessness, other public library users, and I'll explain why that's important in a minute, public library staff to catch their experiences and attitudes in more depth, and some of the social service providers who might be interested in building partnerships with public libraries because they tend to work with the same cohort. There's the people coming into the libraries, there are also the people using their services. So there seems to me to be a really good opportunity to build partnerships and links between those different groups. But what I'm talking to you about today is this first bit up the top here, the survey of Australian public library workers. So this survey was designed to capture their attitudes and experiences when working with people who they think might be homeless. And again, it's often hard to tell when they come into their libraries. And even if they don't look like the typical, rough sleeper, often library staff will be aware that someone's homeless because they might have told them something or shared a story with them, or it might be obvious in other ways. So often library staff are really good at recognising who might be homeless or at risk of homelessness or other forms of poverty or disadvantage, just because they're really good at knowing their clients and who's coming into their buildings. So the overall goal of the survey was to answer the question of what are the experiences and attitudes of Australian public library staff regarding people who may be experiencing homelessness being present in their libraries. So I sent this question, sent an online survey out to all the Australian public library workers. So that included volunteers as well as paid staff. And it was qualified staff and unqualified staff and just the whole lot. So anyone who works in a public library. I got just under 500 responses back, which was a little bit disappointing. There's obviously a lot bigger workforce than that, but it did give me a nice chunk of data to work with. And I distributed that through our professional association. Each state and territory has a state or territory representative who are then in touch with each of the library sites within that state or territory, and they distributed the survey for me, and also a bit of word of mouth and sending things around to people that I knew as well. So what I'll show you now is some of the results of what came back from that survey. So the first question I asked them was, how often are you aware of people in your library who you think might be experiencing homelessness? So I wanted to get an idea of how frequently people are seeing people they think might be homeless in their libraries, whether it's really common or not very common. How often is this something that is apparent to them? And you can see there that about 43% of people, of library workers, are seeing people they think might be homeless each day in their library. And, very, very few never see anyone who's homeless there. The second question I then asked was, okay, well, how many people are you seeing each time? How many people each day are you seeing who you think might be homeless? And most libraries that answered this one will say, 1 or 2 to 3 times a day. So it's a regular everyday thing for most of the responses, and most of the people are saying 2 to 3 or maybe 1 person a day. So it's it's a small group, but again, only 7% is visible. So perhaps there's a whole lot more that the library staff just weren't aware of. But it is a consistent and a regular event for them to be working with or sharing spaces with people they think might be homeless. So then I thought, well, I wonder if they've got policies that will help them guide their work with this community. So I said, does your library have a policy that specifically relates to users experiencing homelessness? And a few of them did say yes. So you've got about 22% there, 23% saying yes, and just over 40 said no, we don't have any policies that help us work with this community. And about 35% said, I don't know, which suggests to me it's as good as a no, because if you don't know you've got a policy or not, then you can't be using it. So it seems to me there's a really good opportunity there for building internal policy within public libraries to help library staff know what they can and can't do, what they should and shouldn't do working with this community, sort of where those lines are of what's okay to help with and what's not, and what alternatives there might be if they can't help them themselves. What's the next step? So I think that's something that will probably turn up in my recommendations, is that there be some specific policies written into public library policies. Then I asked if there are any policies that they did have that might affect homeless people more than other people. So things like not being allowed to sleep in the library or not being able to lie down on the couch, all those things that people might affect people experiencing homelessness more than everyone else. And we've got about 32% there saying, yes, we do have policies that are likely to have a bigger impact on people experiencing homelessness than everybody else. But 44% said no, and you've got about 24% there saying, well, I don't know. So again, that's as good as it's an opportunity to perhaps look at policies to see whether is this actually the intended outcome, or is there some way we can change this to allow it to be less detrimental to people experiencing homelessness. The other question I asked was, does your library issue library cards to people without a fixed address? And we've got about 26% there saying no. So over a quarter of our libraries won't let people without a fixed address have a library card. And about 65% said yes, they do. But it's interesting, what I learned last week is that even if I'll talk about this in a minute, but I went to Bathurst and talked to the library there about their work with homeless community. And they said, yeah, we can let them borrow. They have a special card for someone with no fixed address, but it actually changes what that person can do. So they aren't allowed to borrow as many books as everybody else, and they're not allowed to borrow DVDs, and there's other restrictions on them as well. So even though they're allowed to have a library card, they are treated differently to everybody else. But there's 26% of library workers here who are saying that their library won't issue cards to people experiencing homelessness. And I haven't got a slide for this, but one of the next questions I asked was, well, what do you need a card for? So what are these people missing out on if they haven't got a card? And it was typically things like borrowing, of course, but it was also things like using the computer or being able to log on to the Wi-Fi, or being able to use the audio-visual like TVs to watch movies, things like that. So there's a whole lot of disadvantage built into that, not letting people have a library card. Then I asked, does your library charge fines for late or unreturned items? And I was surprised at this one. I thought all libraries had got rid of late fees, because it's a real barrier for anybody who's counting their dollars, that if you have a late book and you're going to get fined for it, chances are you're not going to borrow anything, because you don't want to have to incur that fine or have that stress about getting a book back on time. And particularly for people who are sleeping rough, they can't keep track of their belongings easily. Things get stolen and things get wrecked or left out in the rain. And it's a big barrier for them to know that they are going to be fined if they borrow something and that happens. So we've got there about almost 40% of library workers saying, yeah, we will fine you if you bring something back late or if it doesn't come back. So that was an interesting response I wasn't expecting. Then I asked the question, have you ever felt that you think a person you think might be experiencing homelessness has had a negative effect on other library users? And this one really surprised me. I was expecting them to say, no, like we know they're in the library, but they don't really cause any impact on anyone else. But nearly 70% of library workers said, yes, we know these people are here and they are having a negative influence on other library users. And that really surprised me. So one of the things I've done with this story here that you can see is when I go into my case studies, which I've done one of so far, and I'll talk about that in a minute, I ask other library users the question backwards. So I'll say to them, have you ever been disturbed by someone you think might be homeless? And I haven't had a chance to look through my data yet from answering this question from library users, but a really quick look through it suggests that no, they're not saying yes to this. They feel that they haven't been bothered by someone experiencing homelessness. So the library staff are worrying a lot about this. They're saying, yes, we think they're disturbing our other customers, but the other customers are going, no, doesn't worry me. So it's like there's a story in there about expectations and concerns that may not be valid. Then I asked this question, which also really surprised me. Have you ever felt unsafe at work because of the behaviour of a library user you think might be experiencing homelessness? And we've got here 45% of library staff have said, yes, I have felt unsafe at work because of someone who I think is homeless. And I thought that was really interesting. I wasn't expecting that number to be as high as it was. And that's something I've been exploring and I will continue to explore in the case studies that I'm working with. But it highlights a real problem that we've got staff who aren't feeling safe, and that's not okay because this is their workplace and their livelihood and they need to feel safe. And it's something that I'm going to be looking into further, but it's a really interesting result there. Then I asked the library staff why they think library users who might be experiencing homelessness are coming into the library. Their top 5 answers were there. So things that you might think of yourself, like getting out of the weather because it's safe, there's bathrooms you can use, you can plug in your device, and it's a place to fill in time. What's interesting about this is that there's a little bit of literature that exists that asks homeless people, why are you in the library? And these answers here aren't usually the reasons why they've come in. They're usually things like to borrow books or to read the newspaper or to hang out with other people. And it's just like everybody else's answers would be if they were asked, why are you here? So again, there's this sort of disconnect between why library staff think people are coming in versus why those people themselves are coming in. And I've got some data that is also going to be looking at, well, it does look at why the homeless users that I've been talking to have come into the library. And again, it's not to get out of the weather or the safe space or the bathrooms. They can get that elsewhere. The library, for them, it's the ones that I was speaking to are saying it's because I like to read, or I like to catch up with the newspaper, or I like sitting in here and I meet my friends, or I like being around other people. There's all sorts of reasons, but these aren't them, which is really interesting. Then I asked library staff, do you think you've got the skills and knowledge you need to work well with people experiencing homelessness? And I got about 43% said yes, we do. But there's a lot of people there who are saying no, or they're not sure. So well over half are not saying yes to that question. So what was interesting about this is that most people who said yes were from New South Wales, And that was interesting because they've all, not all of them, but most of them have done training with this guy called Ryan Dowd, who's written a book about public libraries and homelessness. He's an American man, and he isn't a library worker, but he has written this book, and he does this training for librarians or library workers working with people experiencing homelessness to try and give them some skills and tips and tricks and how to work with that community. So a lot of the people who have done that training have said, yes, I feel equipped to work with these people well. But a lot of people who've done that training also say, no, I am from New South Wales, I've done the training, but I still don't feel well equipped to work with this community. And often that's because even though you do the training, you know yourself, if you do training in something, if you aren't using those skills a lot or constantly, you tend to forget them or lose them, or you have to like dredge them up out of the back of your mind sort of in the heat of the moment, and it's really hard to do. So I think there's some opportunities there for improving the way we train staff, or perhaps the consistency of the way we train staff. And also quite a few people said that he's an American man, so the training is very sort of American focused. And there's an opportunity, I think, for Australian training to be more tailored to the Australian community and Australian libraries. So then I gave the survey respondents some statements and asked them to agree or disagree about those statements in relation to how they feel about their work. The first one of those was, it's part of my job at the library to provide social services to people experiencing homelessness. And you can see here that most people agreed. So we've got about almost 40% saying agree, and there's about 20% saying they strongly agree. So there's a really strong idea in the minds of library workers that, yeah, this is part of my role, to provide a social service to people experiencing homelessness. But there's also a lot of people there who are disagreeing or are neutral about it, or actually strongly disagree. So that is a really interesting thing that I will be exploring in my case studies about what library workers see as their role in relation to people experiencing homelessness. Another statement was, I sometimes do more than I probably should to help users I think may be experiencing homelessness. So I wanted to ask this question to understand what the impact on library workers is. How are they approaching this sort of as an individual, and how are they internalising this work or being exposed or working with the people from this community? And a lot of people here are saying they agree or strongly agree that they are probably doing more than they should when they want to work with this community. But it's a smaller amount of people saying they disagree with that statement. So this suggests to me that there's a role for policy, again, internal policy within the library, saying what you should and shouldn't do, where the line is, that you should, things you can do, things you really shouldn't do, but then almost like a triaging thing, or who to then go to. If it's over your line of where you should go, then who do you then refer to on to help people rather than just leaving them? And the next question was very similar. I spend time and energy worrying about library users I think may be homeless. And again, we've got a lot of people saying they agree or strongly agree that they're spending time and energy worrying about these people that are coming into their libraries that they think might be homeless, and a smaller amount saying disagree or just strongly disagree. So this tells me this picture, like we've got people coming into most of our libraries 2 or 3 times a day. They'll see people, and it's playing on our library staff's minds. They don't always know what to do. They don't always feel safe, and they are worrying about the impact on other library users. And then they carry that worry with them as they go home or as they work through the day. So it is having a significant impact on our library workers. That's what I've learned from this survey. So I've written this up more fully. There's a whole lot more data in the survey that's come out, and I've written that up, and it's under review at the moment with the Journal of Library Administration. It's been back for one revision, and now it's sitting back with them in a revised format. So hopefully that'll get published soon and you'll be able to read a bit more about it. But things I've been doing since I did that survey, I spent all of last week and a little bit more in Bathurst in New South Wales. I'm in Melbourne, in Victoria, so it was a trip up north for me, which was lovely. And I spent the week talking with people from the homeless community. You can see on the right-hand side here, this is one of the lunches that's put on by the Bathurst Uniting Social Service group. They belong to the Bathurst Uniting Church up there, and they have multiple lunches and events through the week for people experiencing homelessness. They feed them, they've got clothing they can grab, there's all sorts of things that they're doing for them. They're a fantastic group of people. So I spoke to and interviewed and recorded interviews with 15 people experiencing homelessness about libraries and their use of the library in town, which is this one here on the left. They've got one branch in town, so this is one of my regional sites. And I also delivered a survey of library users where I'm testing their experiences of having people experiencing homelessness in their shared library spaces, to test that idea that library workers were worried about that people experiencing homelessness are actually causing disruption, and they worry that how that's affecting other library users. So I'm testing that by surveying the library users along with lots of other questions. And I've done in-depth interviews with, I think it was 9 library staff about their experiences, their worries, the things that they'd like the library to be able to do, where they think the line is between doing what is right and doing too much. And that's been really interesting. I just got back on Monday, so I haven't had a chance to sort of chew through the data yet, but I'm really looking forward to dipping into that a bit further. And from there, what's next? So I've got, as I said, I've got 2 to 6 case studies, 2 urban, 2 regional and 2 remote. My 2 urban ones, one will be Melbourne, my hometown. That's nice and easy for me. Then also Moreton Bay, which is a sort of suburb of Brisbane. Then the regionals, Bathurst I've just done. Darwin will happen later in the year, probably around August. And then the 2 remote communities that I'll be going to are probably Port Lincoln and Port Hedland. I need to do some more work in getting that all set up at the moment. So that's sort of in my planning, but Darwin and Moreton Bay and Melbourne are all ready to go. So that's all pretty exciting. I'll be trying to get all these, the other 5 done by the end of the year, or like the end of April next year. And that'll give me a full 12 months to then write it up and sort of, go through different outputs and different reporting from that. So that's it. I want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for coming along, and ask if you have any questions. This chap here is one of the men at the Bathurst Uniting Social Service. They run a cooking class every Monday for anybody who is homeless and wants to come along and learn how to cook. A lot of the homeless community have an electric frying pan, or they might have a rice cooker. And these people were running classes for how to cook a good nutritious meal in just a frying pan or in just a rice cooker. And this program was started by a man who had left prison recently, and he recognised that people who were coming out of jail didn't know how to cook for themselves because they'd spent years just being served up food and they'd lost all those skills. And so this was his way of trying to contribute to the community, is to get guys who are leaving the prisons to come and learn how to cook. And then a whole lot of other people turned up as well. So now he teaches anybody who wants to come, and then so they cook food together and then they share the food amongst each other. Anything that's left over gets boxed up and put into the freezer for people coming along through the week to make sure that they're not hungry. So it's a really lovely project. But that's it from me. So wondering if there are any questions, and thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Jane. Would you like to stop sharing so we can see everyone?
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and I think while you do that, there have been quite a few comments, really good comments, because this is an exciting project. I agree with everyone. We do have a question there in the chat. I think Rachel asks, I wonder if the reason is that visitors are only in the library for a limited time and the librarians are there all day. I think this was about the difference perception Am I right, Rachel? Do you want to
Yeah.
unmute yourself?
Yeah, I actually, when I was a young person, one of my first jobs was working in a library, and there was always a lot of homeless folk in there. And I think that because you're there all day as your place of work and you observe it, you see it differently. And maybe a patron's coming in to do a particular thing, and they're more focused on their own tasks than looking at other people because they're not really there to people watch. I wonder if that's something to get clarity on. What are your thoughts, Jane?
Yeah, it could well be. Library staff are there, all day, every day, so they see it all. But other library users are coming and going, so they would only see what's happening while they're in the building. So yeah, that could well be it. But all the events that library staff are seeing that are worrying them have also been witnessed by other people. So it's also likely, I think, that if there was to be an impact, that it would be felt. That I don't know, maybe library staff are just really worried more than they should be about that, the effect of that community. A lot of but I just spent, as I said, the last week in Bathurst, and I was walking my iPad around to library users to say, would you mind doing this survey? Which is really hard. It's really confronting, rocking up cold to people you don't know and interrupting them doing stuff and saying, showing an iPad at them saying, please do this survey. Anyway, most of them, everyone who said yes, which was most people, they would do the survey and then they'd hand me the iPad back and then they'd tell me what they thought as well. So I got all this lovely verbal stuff that I hadn't been able to capture, but they were all, every single one of them, apart from one man, all the others were saying, it's great, they should be in here, thanks for doing this work, it's so important, it's really good that the library's here. It was all really, really supportive and positive, apart from one man who was horrid, but it happens.
Okay, thanks, Jane. And Hamid has got another question. I'm just going to sift through the chat here. Those users who said no, they haven't been bothered by homeless people, did you ask them if they have encountered any at the library? Because their answer might be because they haven't seen any.
Yeah, and I can do that, Hamid, with a pivot table. I've got all the data from the survey in a pivot table, and I can do that. I haven't actually done that little bit of interrogating, but I could. That's a good point. I'll check that out. Thank you, Hamid. It's a very Hamid thing to say.
A very Hamid thing to say. Thank you, Hamid. I guess those are the two questions, and the other comments are really supportive comments of your excellent DECRA project, Jane. So yeah, congrats again.
Great.
I personally have a lot to learn from you. So yeah, any other comments perhaps? Sorry, Jen, did I cut you off? You were about to say something.
No.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. I think that the actual survey questions are extremely well framed, and I think it would be nice at some point to get some insight into how you constructed those particular questions in order to gather the data, because the way that they are framed is very evocative and interesting.
Oh, that's interesting you should say that. I asked one chap to fill out the survey as a user. This is the user survey though. Oh, so yeah, I'm not answering your question at all. Yeah, but another comment about that. So I gave the user survey to a user in the library and he answered it and then he handed it back and then he told me what he really thought, of course. And he said, I'm homeless at the moment. And the questions you're asking are really good because you're really testing things that I wonder about too. So I think you're right. The way you frame questions is really important. The ones for the user survey, it was really informed by reading literature that already existed, where, read a journal article where somebody is reported feeling, anxious about other library users. So I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. I'll test that. So it was not sort of dreaming up stuff myself. It's really testing propositions that had already been put out there by others.
I wonder if the uncertainty librarians are experiencing could be linked to like the responses on training and whether they've received it or whether they feel that it was adequate or, too American or whatever, as well. Because, the perception of am I qualified to deal with this, can be hugely, hugely impactful.
Yeah, you're right. And I thought that too. So I did, I got a pivot table working in Excel, which enabled me to then look at all the people who said that they felt they had enough training against where they were from. So I could see that most of them were from New South Wales. So there is obviously an impact from training, but there's, you know, more that we could do.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I've spoken to some people from New South Wales before about the Ryan Dowd training, and they've all said, yeah, it's really good, but I wish it had been more Australian. So I think there's a real opportunity for someone to jump in and make a fortune like he has. Like, he's really, really popular. The State Library of New South Wales have flown him from America twice to do training for their library staff. And I think, yeah, if there was someone in Australia who could do that, that would be so much better. But, you know, he's sort of cornered the market at the moment.
Hello.
Hey, Michelle.
I just wanted to reiterate Rachel's comment about those questions. As I was listening, Jane, my ears really pricked up when you were talking through those questions. And I'll probably be influenced by some of them myself with my own research. But it struck me that, you know, I have lots of experience writing questions with my radio background, right? That's what I do. I write questions to interview people. But it would be useful maybe to get a little bit more from you, either today or at a later date, maybe a research seminar, about how you kind of devised those questions.
Yeah, sure. I can certainly look at doing that. Thanks, Michelle.
That would be great.
I'm just going to jump in there, Jane, and we still have 3 months available for that, probably, if you want to go through that in one of the 3 months, either September, October, or December. And if any one of you would like to also, you know, present in one of the 3 months, that'll be lovely as well. And I think we've got a comment there. Simon, writing good survey questions is the hardest thing in research. Yeah, I can't agree more, Simon.
Looks like we're all nominating you to do that workshop, Jane.
No worries. I'll put it in the diary. Oh, thank you everyone for coming. It's been lovely to see your faces.
Yeah.
Share what I've been doing.
Yeah. Look, we still have 20 minutes, technically. If you still have any comments or questions, okay, you just turned your video on. Were you about to ask questions?
No, I wasn't. I was just going to say, here's my face. I need to go. I felt rude just to do it. But thank you. That was really interesting. Thanks
You're
for
welcome.
sharing.
You're welcome. All right, we might wrap it up.
We probably should wrap it up and give you back your 20 minutes to do work, actually. I'll stop sharing. I'll stop recording now. Nice to see you, everyone, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for hosting, Anita. Thank you, Jane.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye, Kit.